Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today's guest is Yessica Avancena. And Yessica is a licensed marriage and family therapist who's a certified mindfulness teacher and psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. She is the founder and CEO of Mindful You Psychotherapy and Healing Centers. She's also author of How to Proof Your Best Life, which is this book right here, which we'll be talking about a little bit. And also has written the children's mindfulness book called I Am the Mindful Mountain and the Mindful Minute app, which has the mindfulness masterclass and guided meditations in her unique style. And we came across Yessica after we had done our interview with Lee Carroll and Monica Mariani, and who we've had guests on here many times. We've had some really amazing conversations, and Yessica touched base with us and explained some of the work she was doing. We thought this actually would be a really good piece to tie into this specific conversation. So we've talked lots about life, death, and beyond. And Yessica has had her own personal experiences as well as with lots of different clients that she's worked with. So we're going to really dive into this and even aspects of plant medicine and how that can play into this and what it's like to go through the death process, maybe more of an ego death process, and then a rebirth, and how do we now show up for our lives in a new way? So Yessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely loved learning about you guys, through that Lee Carroll experience. And then I've kind of been following your podcast. So glad to be here.
Super. So why don't we start off from the beginning here? So tell us a little bit about your journey into where you are, because I mean, you've really dived into in many aspects around the idea of health and wellness, mental health, self-healing. You've really blended, I think, sort of psychology and spirituality in a really beautiful way.
Yes, yes. I mean, for me, and as I hope everybody else that starts off with being that spirit and trying to walk your way through this earth experience. And ever since I was a child, true to being a Pisces, I thought, you find God in church, and that's where you find that experience. And so early on, I was always thinking about, God. I was really fascinated by the stories of the virgin apparitions when I was a little girl. I thought, man, those kids are so lucky, so lucky. And in my heart, I really wished I was one of them, that I could actually get to see, Mother Mary, and I just thought that was the most amazing thing on the planet. And so I was an avid reader of those kinds of stories, even when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old. So I feel like I've always been searching for that kind of experiential experience, not just what you read somewhere. Um, Little did I know, closer in my 40s, I would actually have those kinds of experiences. Maybe I've been seeking it, like I said, all along. But yes, I started in traditional psychotherapy, traditional psychology path, and I did that for a long time. In fact, I worked for county services. I did the ER of, mental health services, helping those that are really just worried about survival. And so that taught me so much, right? So much about people, about the pain and suffering of others, and humility as well. Because I mean, going out there on the streets, trying to find folks, things like that. Moved into private practice, and I really was anxious to do some therapy, to really help some people. And so I did that for many years, and I still do some of that. But I always found there was like, okay, we've gotten this far, and now what? Now what? It seemed like there was always that kind of, stop that either, I felt, well, we've done all the medications, we've done all the therapy, we've done all the things. So what else is out there? What else can help, people and myself? So that's where my journey of seeking other alternative forms of healing, Reiki, all these other energy practices started for me.
I can't agree with you more. And I'm actually a Pisces too, so I totally get this this idea of this journey and constantly kind of seeking and the experience. I feel like right now, particularly over this last while, it's been all that really does it for me now is experiential. It really needs to be experiential. For a long time, it was very I think head heavy. I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand. And I mean, there's still a part of me that likes that. But at the heart of it, I find like that doesn't really convert over to transformation. It's the direct, tangible experience. And I feel like right now, that is what we all have to have. It's we might enjoy the intellectual process a little bit, but that's really not what's going to get us to create big changes. It has to be a different set of information. I think we've kind of hit the bar as far as we can go with logic and linear thinking, and now we're actually trying to tap into something that is goes well above that. And this is where we tie into these higher frequencies that allow us to tap more directly into knowing, visceral knowings, deeper senses of intuition. And I think the kind of experiences that you're talking about help us have that visceral connection again. You had mentioned in your bio here that you said personally you've spiritually died several times through what some have termed ego death. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that experience and how that happened.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I wanted to touch on that too. Like, I think it's that left brain experience that school is left brain, work is left brain, this world is left brain. And so we're very much experts, but then we need that right brain experiential piece. And that's what I think we're getting back to, right? Or craving more of. And so for me, the plant medicine journey started about 3 years ago, but I will say this, I'll preface it with saying that I started in energy work and mindfulness. And so I did that for many, many years before I went into plant-based medicine. And I think that it was a wonderful base for me because knowing how to quiet your mind, knowing how to get through an anxious state through breathing, through quieting your mind, as well as, working with your hands or energy in any way that you do is very helpful along that path, right? Because some people may think about psychedelics. It's all over now with, in the news, clinical trials, lots of positive things out there as far as mental health and wellness and things like that, spiritual awakening. But I do think that having a solid base in things like meditation, mindfulness, and other wellness practices is super crucial and important. But having said that, so I was prime, I was ready. I was so ready. By the time it actually came into my life, I felt like, gosh, I've been looking for this my whole life. And so when I had my first experience, I had it with ayahuasca. And I've only followed one lineage. So I followed the Taitas, or the shaman that lead the ceremony, 7 generations in their family. So I'm very close now to this particular Inga tribe. And so the first time was literally a home run for me. Whereas other people, and, again, if you're interested more about plant medicines, definitely a whole nother conversation. But for me, it opened right up from that very first experience. I was so ready. I was just kind of like, okay, here I am, and fully letting go. In that first experience, I did have an ego death, which was life-changing. Still to this day, I feel like one of the most profound experiences of my life. But here's the difference that I've now kind of seen throughout many more journeys, is that was almost not my conscious choice. It just kind of happened for me. So I didn't make a choice to say, okay, now I choose to let go and transcend death. That didn't happen that way. I literally was in the midst of my dark night of the soul, what some people say. So I was in that judgment day experience of what we would think in a movie is like the revision of your whole life in front of you and all of the bad things you've ever done, even the little things, and the people who you did them to are right there. So it's like one of the most grueling experiences of my life, because in that moment, I thought, I am like the worst human being on this planet. I probably just shouldn't even be here. What is the point of this? Because even past life stuff was coming up that I wasn't even aware of. And so right after they took me to the darkest and what felt like hours of this grueling experience, it incredibly turned around with all those same exact, almost like 100 people in this theater style auditorium. It's like I was on stage, they were all there. And then they all stood up and started clapping for me. And so then it changed to this like, you did an amazing job. You're doing an amazing job. Despite all these things that you think you did wrong, here's like our unconditional love for you. And here's our tribute to you of how well you've done. And I mean, this was just, I was already crying and everything else. This was just like, oh my gosh. Never experienced that, of course, in my life. And then I felt the sudden urge. I was sitting on the floor because I had been purging. I just went backwards. I just kind of like fell backwards slowly. And the last thing I remember seeing was Archangel Michael on my right hand side. And that was it. I was gone. I was gone. My body, my spirit left my body. But again, this wasn't like I willed it. So it just happened for me. I left my body. I felt like they were working on my back. I have a couple of herniated discs. So that was kind of happening. And then I was kind of like shoved back in or thrown back into my body. And it was like life returned to me in this like big breath. And then when I woke up from that experience, that is the one time where all the ascended masters came, all kind of like I felt their presence. There was Green Tara, there was, Mother Mary, who I'd wanted to meet my entire life. There were all of these incredible ascended masters, and then of course Jesus in front of me, literally dancing along with the music with me. So the most incredible experience of my life. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, where has this been my entire life, this experience?
Wow. Jessica, I'm wondering for people who haven't had plant medicine ceremony experience in the past, when you're speaking of having these images come to you, how was that happening? Like, were you actually seeing it? Were you physically seeing this happening? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Everybody's different, right? The way the medicine kind of works with everybody, but overall, your senses are incredibly heightened. Like your sense of hearing is incredible. I felt like I could hear for 3 miles and like a dog barking somewhere. And we're in the middle of the jungle, which is also a beautiful experience because you're away from any Wi-Fi, you're away from civilization. Everything is natural, as far as sounds. So again, set and setting is incredibly important, and it's a safe space. Everybody's kind of together, but in their own space. And so for me, there was a combination of seeing in my mind, so I could see the things happening in my mind, or feeling someone's presence and immediately knowing who it was. We talk about, death and dying and these processes that we all fear so much. My father was actually the one who started the whole visions for me. He was the first person that came to my mind as both I felt his presence and I knew who he was. And then I heard in my mind, we say heard, but really you hear it as if it's outside coming in, but really it's in your mind. And I heard, I'm leaving, to which I knew exactly what he meant. He was diagnosed with cancer about a year and a half earlier, and he immediately tells me I'm leaving. So he hadn't died yet. And so he was the first person to show up and gave me that message. 6 months later, he did pass. Yeah. So all of what I saw or heard, it could have very well been an internal process for me, but it feels as real as kind of me talking to you now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. When you were talking about being in the auditorium with everybody, it reminded me of, I think we were talking to Nancy Dennison, and who wrote the books Backwards, and she's had several near-death experiences, and she talked about the life review. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like you were going through your life review. And one of the things she said, though, is that the difference with it is that you kind of experience all of the stuff that you have done, like positive, negative, however you want to look at it at that point, and you feel it, but you also get to view it through the eyes or the lens of unconditional love. So it sounds like that's kind of what it turned into as you were going through that. So that's really beautiful, because a lot of times it's hard to even fathom what that could be like, to actually hold everything that we've experienced or done, for ourselves, to others, all of these different things, but from that lens of unconditional love. And because it's almost like we very, very rarely get to actually hold that space. So to actually be there, to have that experience is really something. You get a chance to actually see a totally different perspective on the stuff that we do as human beings.
Yes, yes. And that feeling was overwhelming, like overwhelming humility, joy. I mean, I was like, wow, this is what 5D is. Again, that experiential piece, prior to this, you can read about it, you can hear somebody else's experience about it, but going through it, that's why people say this is life-changing. Because once you experience that, then you're like, wow, I can never not experience that. It almost like increases that bandwidth.
Yessica, how did that experience then inform your life when you came back to your day-to-day, to your family, to your friends, to your work?
Yes, I mean, gosh, all these experiences since then, it is difficult, because we always say, like, unless you're there, you kind of don't get it, like the magnitude of it, and then you come back, like what we call, like, with the fire, lit. I mean, the fire of life and passion, and passionate to be in this planet. And I know that's hard to hear sometimes with all that we see in the world happening. These kinds of experiences remind you, no, 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 it's not all horrible. It's not all bad. And I'm not saying there isn't pain and suffering in the world. We all do. But it's the fact that, gosh, I'm so lucky to be alive and in this body at this time to make this kind of change, right?
So when you come back after you have that ego death, and then you have this rebirth, I feel like that's kind of partly where this book kind of comes into place, because it gives people a little bit of a template, I think, for maybe showing up in a different way and creating a different type of a reality. So where do you kind of start then when you come back after you've had that rebirth? One of the first things you talk about that I think is really important in the book is you talk about knowing yourself. And we did a whole series on, it was called Know Thyself. It was really around this questions to facilitate a return to who you truly are, because it's so important to start from that place. So what's the process for us to be able to do that? Maybe talk a little bit about what you mean by knowing ourselves, and how do we arrive at a place where we know we're getting information from who we really are?
And even like when you're speaking of ego death, what you mean by the ego? Maybe if we can start there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. So we are all born so beautifully just aware, right? I always remember, like, that newborn that just is taking in through the different senses, everything that's around you. And then here we start to think, we start to introduce language, we start to introduce comparisons. And there is where the ego, the personality, develops and is born. The ego really does accompany us throughout the whole life. And what I've been kind of experientially shown during the ayahuasca and other plant-based medicines has been this idea that we have the left brain, we have the right brain, but it's not a fight with one another. It's not like one's better than the other. In fact, what happens during these experiences is that it becomes one. You have this unity occur that I guess people might have called, nirvana or heaven, or these higher states of consciousness, is really just when it's no longer the right brain versus the left brain or anything like that. It just becomes one. Your brain is no longer two pieces kind of dealing separately, but more so just the state of being in oneness. So that's kind of the ego mind idea, is that which, kind of deals with judgment, reasoning, all of these things that we are taught. We are taught. And then the true authentic self for me is more related to who you are intrinsically, who you've always been, who you always will be, and returning to that, or remembering that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so then I think maybe the process, because I find like what often happens, and it's such a tricky scenario a lot of times, and something I think we have to constantly be aware of. Otherwise, I think it sneaks in, because it's very sneaky. Even as you move through different levels of consciousness, it becomes more sneaky in a lot of ways. How do you know when you are operating from the true self versus when you're operating from the often false sense of perceptions and identifications that we've accumulated over our lifetime and often past lifetimes?
And that's really important too, because, when you're doing these journeys, you do get to experience this expanded sense of self. In fact, I do think there is some sort of a playbook that ultimately takes you back to your own divinity, right? To show you that, gosh, you are this magnificent, God co-creator. But if your ego mind still isn't where it needs to be, at times that's where you have those kind of intersections between somebody who can properly integrate, right, these experiences of, gosh, I felt Christ consciousness, or I felt like I was, the embodiment of God on earth. And that could very well be, that in the medicine, that's what you experienced. But then if you haven't worked enough with your ego, through meditation, through your other spiritual practices or whatever practices, that's where then we get these, grandiosity type of, thinking, or like, I'm going to go start my own church because now I am God, and we do have to caution against that, which I think is just very naturally re-experiencing who we are as a divine being, but then also within the construct of ego-less mind. And so how do we know the difference? One seems very much in alignment with peace, humility, kindness, compassion, loving kindness, like all these felt experiences that are quite in balance and that don't need anything. They don't need to be someone or do something or create, or be known for whatever. And then the ego always seeks those other things, right? It always seeks, like, whether it's financial or some sort of statue or some kind of, here you are, this great being, right? And because if truly that is the case, that we all are these divine beings and we can experience ourselves as such, then we just need to be that, and we don't need to have it on some sort of billboard that says that.
Interesting. It's almost as if when we identify more with the ego, that which we are really not, but is more a fragment of our mind, is this created sense of self that is quite far away from the true sense of who we truly are, which is spirit and form, connected to, the higher self or source or God or creator, whatever you want to give that label to as, then the ego then has to have all these other things, like the stature that you're talking about, and the bigger house and the bigger car, and just so that it can have a bigger sense of self, because the ego is essentially competing with a much bigger sense of being, which it really can't compete with. But when we're so fixated,
recognized, right? Like, here I am,
right?
And
exactly.
and the idea that, wait, maybe you are too, but no, I am different. It's still that differentiation, where on this side, we're all these divine beings that are on our way to ascended masterhood, ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The other thing I think is really, I know has been a part of my journey anyways through this process, is my concepts of even what, loving kindness means and what self-love means and all of these things. And it's bigger than the box that I put it in. What I've kind of found is, like, there's an aspect of, Because I would have definitely been more of like, I didn't like to ruffle the boat too much. I didn't like people to get uncomfortable. I would put that into a box often of kind of loving kindness. Like I just didn't want to create conflict or anything. And part of that would be also then censoring myself in a lot of ways. And so what I've kind of found in this process is that there's more authenticity, there's more not caring so much about how others perceive me necessarily. There's more trying to really follow that inner voice above everything else. It doesn't mean that you're not considerate to what's going on in the world around you and other people, but you run everything more through yourself at some point and see ultimately where it lands. And I mean, even there can be like a ferocity in it too, I find, and strong sort of boundaries around things. Sometimes I've just found in spiritual circles that sometimes those don't fit into the perceived notion of what it means to be loving or kind or compassionate. But I mean, I've seen different teachers too that I would say have very much moved up the layers of consciousness, and they can be very strong, very sort of strong boundaries, and have a very strong sense of where a line is on certain things too, and call it for what it is. What's your experience with that, and how that sort of, where that plays into this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this journey that I'd been on at first, it was very much like this private journey I was taking with myself. And, gosh, especially in the psychology world, you don't want to speak too much on this kind of foo-foo stuff, because then you've kind of really gone that way or what have you. But really, the more I do it, the more I realize like this is the real thing. It's kind of that old adage of we are, spirits having a human experience, not the other way around. And that becomes so, powerful in that speaking your truth becomes so much more important, and not being inauthentic to who you are, because then that is all ego, right? It's even trying to keep up a shell of I'm this person or I'm that person, where then I really feel like I'm not, or I'm inauthentic, or I'm a fraud. So even if it's painful, like that's the new lessons that I've come out of the last few medicine journeys, was speak your truth, even if ... right? Even if that has a repercussion. Because this concept and there's this book I came across, and I really don't recall the author, but it was this One Mind. It was called One Mind, and it really just solidified to me that we already know everything about everything. We just choose to not, right? Like, for instance, we already know what everyone else thinks about me, or what this individual thinks about me. We just pretend to not. And so when you think about life that way, then there's really this great motivation to just be who you are and speak your truth, because they probably already sense it anyway.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think that's the biggest thing we can do. And I mean, a lot of times where people want to play a role in creating a better world, creating a better life, I think so much of it starts with that. It's like, we just did a talk about this a little while ago, but it was like, how do you really just keep bringing more of who you really are, more of your unique self into the world? And that's what's going to make things different. There was a beautiful quote, I think, that Taya just shared a little while ago. Not necessarily a quote, but a statement that I'll let her read here in a moment if she can find it. But it's so solidified. We were talking about this in the car just the other day, but it was this idea that when we're not showing up like that, we're doing such a disservice for ourselves and the world, because we just then stick with what is at this point in time, what's sort of the right way to be, the right thing to say, and so we've solidified ourselves in this little box, and then that's what is sort of ideal, and we've missed all of this other stuff.
Okay, and the author of this is I Am Vibrant Spirit, and he can be found on Instagram as well as Facebook. Creativity is the unique and original expression of life itself, accentuating what people think, and caring about how people view us is forcing our minds into a mold. This mold then becomes a limited prison that encapsulates all the beliefs and views of our society at that specific point in time. We then become secondhand people, conforming to patterns, repeating phrases, and thinking in a groove. We are following a predetermined path, programmed to react to life. I know that swimming against the current of societal norms begets enormous discomfort for most people, but this is the price one needs to pay to save one's soul from merging into the dead collective unconscious. That is the price we need to pay for authenticity. You see, only a mind that is free from the fear of ridicule can be creative. There is no method, no technique to get there. It is as simple as that. The greatest prison of modern day society is the fear of what other people think.
Wow. How powerful is that?
And it's such a timely thing that we're speaking of, because looking around us, the influence of media, the influence of certain agendas being pushed out, and we can see, so many of us can see this so clearly now, that it seems that the most powerful thing we can do as individuals, and I'd love to get your take on this as well, is to actually connect to who we truly are, that spirit connected to source, and show up as that within the everyday, moment to moment, in full spontaneity, in full freedom, in being able to express ourselves in how we feel we intuitively need to at that moment. And that is the most powerful way in which we can even contribute to, you know, changes that we want to ultimately see within this lifetime and beyond.
Yes, 100%. And I think that, you know, otherwise we're like a parrot, right? We're just repeating things or acting as if, but it's not really us, or it's not authentically us. And it's not to say you can't start there, for instance, if you're trying to make certain changes in your life. Like I see that with the yoga community, right? Like everybody has to look a certain way or dress a certain way or do certain practices, say certain things. And I find like, okay, well, that's okay if that's like at least getting you from one direction to another, but eventually you can just be yourself and wear whatever you want or use it however you want and make it your own. Make it your own practice. Meditation is very much the same way. You know, I've been teaching meditation for so long, and one of the things that just came into my brain through all these kinds of practices was that, you know what, I don't see value in meditating for an hour at a time anymore, or 45 minutes and just wrestling to try and like, okay, achieve that no mind state and then just stay there. And now what I've really realized is, no, the goal is, at least for me, get to no mind state and then go play. Like then go create, then go manifest, then go do. Like now I'm in those brainwaves that allows me to do these incredible, amazing things. So really the goal isn't, I'm just going to be this empty vessel for an hour and do that over and over and over. No, I'm going to use that as a tool to get in. And now I'm going to have fun. And now I'm going to, you know, do whatever. So absolutely. I think that the more you get to know who you are, and that is a different process for everybody, but it starts with that intuitive thought, with that, I wonder if I do, oh, I like that. And, you know, and you just start following those hunches. And then ultimately, if you can at least have some sort of an idea when somebody, if even yourself asks you, who am I? And you can say a few things around that, then you've started, or you're well into that process. If the answer is, I don't know, I really don't know. And I've had that many clients. I always ask them like, so who are you, right? Who are, capital A-R-E, who are you? And most people haven't given enough thought, or even any thought, to that question. And really, I feel like you can't go somewhere, like I say in my book, if you don't have even an inkling of where you're going. Because once you get to wherever you get, you might realize that wasn't even what you wanted at all, because it wasn't who you were ultimately, right? And then we learn from everything, so there's no wrong answers here, but.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think you, as you kind of eloquently showed, it's a process, you know, like even with, like you were talking about the yoga community, I totally get what you mean. It's like, you almost like, okay, now I'm I'm a yoga person, and I know what that looks like, and we've done that, and we've both done teacher trainings in that, and Taya taught yoga and meditation for a long time, and
I don't think I identified with that though. For me it was a tool to figure out how to actually live my life, because I had so much trouble just feeling like I could survive the everyday. I struggled with that for decades, for a long time, since adolescence. So for me, it was a tool to figure out, okay, maybe this will allow me to function normally on a day-to-day basis. And everything that I kind of observed within that community and through that whole process was more out of curiosity for me.
Yeah, but meaning just you'll see like groups, sometimes we have an affinity for certain groups. It's almost like we try that on for a little bit to see how it feels. As a naturopathic doctor, in that sort of whole world and what that looks like, there's a certain sort of persona around lots of these different things. So I think we do try on these different identities a little bit, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's like, when we talk to RJ Spina, he says, when thoughts come up and then you kind of question, well, what's that thought? Who's having that thought? I am. Okay, well, who am I? And he goes, usually your mind will go blank when you say that. And it's supposed to go blank because ultimately it is like, what? I'm a fractal of God having a human experience. So it's like, who am I is sort of this,
And
at the heart of it is, no.
Yeah, it just
So
is.
you kind of hit this quiet that almost happens in the process of even asking that question, which I think then probably opens the door to having that information of the true self sort of enter in.
Yes, absolutely. And then there should be these kind of words that just maybe trickle in. But
Mhm.
if we don't have at least even that inspiration or that kind of process of, taking that moment to think about it, we're just identifying really more with just the ego, because most people will respond around their profession. They're like, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, or I'm a worker, or I'm a this, or I'm a lawyer. And really those are just labels. But those aren't, those are the ones we're supposed to take off to then find what's really deep inside.
Mhm. What were some of the most practical things that you had done? I mean, you mentioned meditation, and I totally get that process. We've kind of done like, I think, a lot of sort of even a full circle on that. I feel for myself. I used to do a lot of meditation, and then I moved kind of more from meditation to more of a contemplation. So was the idea, can I just sort of encapsulate that state and then hold that sort of in mind and live my day without taking an hour out of my day to sit and be in that space. And then lately, we've been really craving to sit for longer periods of time, particularly like in nature, if we get the chance to, which I shouldn't say we get the chance. We usually make the opportunity to go and sit for periods of time. And I find that just really helpful too. But that's just because that's what we're being called to do right at the moment. But I think, again, it's whatever it is that works for people. But it sounds like one of the keys that you've come to is sort of the quietness, finding the quietness, and any other practice that you've found really help people get through those layers to find who they are.
Yeah, I think that's one of the number one things I hear. And as a meditation teacher, I'm sure you've heard it 10 million times. Oh, I can't quiet my mind. That's like the number one thing that people think, like, first of all, that you have to have this, hour-long period of quieting your mind. But in reality, anything can be meditative, even though it's not a meditation, right? So even some people, as easy as when they're driving, it's really when you hit alpha brainwaves. So that can be done through anything that just kind of slows you down and ties up maybe your hands. That's why for some people, gardening or mechanic work, even, it's really the definition of, you lose kind of track of time. There is definitely no anxious thinking happening. It's just being immersed in an experience where your mind can clear. And so that's a million things for a million different people. So finding what that is for you, that is helpful. But I do think it is a crucial thing for us to get back to. How do we, like, almost like Eckhart Tolle said, right? Did you find the off switch yet? It's finding that for you, because we were born with that ability. Nobody can't do it. It's just like exercise, right? It's like if I wanted to run, 10 miles or whatever, I just need to condition and train for it. We need to remember how it is to quiet the mind, because everything else opens up from there. And then you don't need to sit for an hour if you don't want to, but at first you may need to start there to really harness the power of your mind.
Yeah, I think of it all like a spiritual muscle. Same idea. And so much of it right now, I think it's just having the intention of wanting to find that space and then prioritizing it so that we actually do it at some point throughout our day. Whatever that is, whether that's just, a couple of minutes here or there, or with the intention on sort of holding that space, being aware of it, whatever it is, or showing up and sitting for longer periods, whatever works for you. But the first part is, I think, just as soon as you make the intention that that's important to you and you want to put into your life, I think then a lot of stuff is going to change, because when you do, you'll start to access information in a different way. You'll start to get those synchronicities that pop in, and the intuitions and the sense of knowing. And then I think the more you listen to it and you follow it, it pays dividends. And then you start to trust it more. And then that whole process takes you on a new way of navigating your life.
And that's, I think, what we call this journey, right? That then comes this book, or comes this podcast, and then comes this person, and then comes this thing. And then you just have to kind of walk that path. And however that opens up for you is your path.
Mm-hmm. Yessica, I have a question for you with regards to plant medicine. What is it about the medicine that allows people to open up beyond the physicality of our day-to-day experiences?
Yeah, that's incredible, because people say, like, so how is this different than a drug? I talk about that in my book, is that only the most courageous, honestly, I think, take these paths with working with these plant medicines, and with true people who have had this in their indigenous practice. I really am a big proponent of indigenous practices being kind of part of the medicine, not just, I'm not looking for a pill and kind of situation like that. Because the nature, the music, all of it is part of the experience. It's not just the one thing. But it does allow, so interestingly enough, like a lot of the medicines at the beginning, you're wrestling with your ego mind. That's really like this battle, and especially ayahuasca, which is why so many people have this really kind of adverse reaction to purging, which can come up or down. And people are like, oh my gosh, because other than probably death, right, and fear of heights, I think it's fear of like soiling yourself in front of somebody else, or fear of like this vomiting process. We've moved away so much from that earth experience that is like taking your shoes off, rolling in the dirt, like, oh, there's bugs. You should see how people arrive. I love. So I take folks to Colombia. I take folks down to Tulum, and that's what I do now. This is like what I say I want to do when I grow up full time, is just literally walking alongside people's journeys, with plant medicine, because I get to watch this rebirth, and I get to kind of hold that space. I don't give the medicine, but I do the preparation work, I do the integration work, and I travel with them. So it's really fascinating to watch how people come, really tight about cleanliness, about, bugs this, or, oh, that. And then by the end of it, I mean, their muscles are just in this relaxed state, people walking barefoot, not even caring about, dirt or something that before was so important. Because once you've actually like released that preconceived notion of I'm going to be laughed at or something if I cry out loud, if I purge in front of everybody, if God forbid, like I have an accident, which I'm not suggesting that everybody does, but it's like nobody cares. It's totally this like natural human process that we all have, and we so deathly fear it, that we pretend nobody has it. But it's part of the ego death. That's the whole point of why I'm kind of bringing it up, is that our ego is really who holds that concern. of trying to appear put together, trying to appear, all of these things. They don't even have mirrors in this one retreat, that I go to. They don't have mirrors. So for a week, you don't even know what you look like. Mm-hmm. So it's fast. It's amazing. It's everybody's like worry just lifts completely. And so the ego is really what's concerned with that. The ego is the one that loses out and therefore allows that true authentic self to come through. And then, like I said, now I've learned it's really this merging of the two to create this one mind. And then this connection to the bigger one mind. But yeah, I think that's what allows people to have these incredible experiences. And it may take you 2-3 takes before you even get to that place of really releasing and really letting go of that ego, so that then the glory be kind of situation kind of comes through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really love that you mentioned that. I think that that's such an important part of it. And that feeling of just completely letting go and being vulnerable, of showing up in the rawness of who you are and letting that just be okay. And I mean, I think that can happen in ayahuasca. And I know like several different experiences I've had at different times. I remember even doing like, we did like a traditional old sweat lodge with a Mohawk elder at one point. And I mean, it was a long process. And I mean, at the end of it, everybody in there is just, you're letting out everything that's there. I mean, everybody's just screaming and whatever. And same idea with different breath work, same thing. You kind of hit this point where you literally do feel like you are dying in the process. And then it releases. But in the process of it, there's like, I mean, it's almost like you hit a point where you're like, okay, am I going to pull it back? Because I'm not sure if I'm going to go there, or am I just going to go and just let it all unravel? And it's in that unraveling process that so much freedom starts to just burst out. And then you show up in your regular life, I think, from that place, because you've got a taste of it. And you kind of realize at that point, you let that go and you didn't care so much about what you were doing, if you're drooling or crying or screaming in front of a bunch of other people. It's like there's such a freedom in that experience. So
there's a real sense of lightness that you're able to become one with and know firsthand. Mm-hmm. And then to add any burdens back into your life, which feels heavy, is just not an option anymore.
Right. And you brought up such an incredible point there that, through all these different plant journeys and inclusive of psilocybin, I had come up to this moment that you were talking about of like, I think this is where I pulled back. Mm-hmm. And for a while I'd been talking in our integration circles, because we have a monthly integration call, that I was like, I don't know why I keep going to what I felt was like death's door. It felt like it kept telling me like, let go. And I'm like, are you crazy? I am a mother of 4 and I have 2 little ones. Like, no, what do you mean let go? And I kept going to that same spot. No matter what journey or even what medicine I took, it took me to the same place. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, well, what am I supposed to do here? Right? This was the most difficult experience for me, because all I would think about were my kids, and that would kind of keep me grounded, keep me attached, and then I would back off. So in this most recent multiple, kind of experience and 2-week journey in Colombia, I was able to finally cross over, so to speak. And it was the most life-changing experience now of my life, because it was this thought that it wasn't my kids kind of attaching me here. It was like for my kids. It was for my kids' love. So it kind of showed me the inverse of the way I was thinking about it. And I realized, so this wasn't me dying physically, of course, right? In these types of psychedelic experiences, it's your spiritual death, which our ego knows it's the death of the ego, right? It's the death of it. So that's why it's so like terrified. And in that moment, when I was right there at that exact same juncture, and then they brought up my children, but in the sense of for love, not for, keeping you here. And then I kind of like surrendered my spirit. And I thought about my dad. I said, catch me on the other side. And in that moment, I felt my life leave. I felt like this heaviness in my throat and in my chest, like hard to breathe. And then woof, my spirit left my body. And almost instantly, because I was on the ground, and almost instantly, I heard the words, now get up. So it was almost like you passed the challenge.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, so, get up. And then it happened to me in a couple more ceremonies. But once I was able to identify how it felt, it became easier, so to speak, because I knew, okay, I'm at this juncture and now I know I'm okay. And now I know I'm just transcending. And then that's when everything opened up for me. And in that moment, I realized, gosh, death isn't so scary. And I'm still here. Like I was there when I went to the spirit side, me, and I was there when I came back, me. So my mother is now going through this very difficult now, I think, transition in her life as I watched my father a couple of years ago. And I was able to share this experience with her. And I have peace around at least my parents, which is a very difficult process to go through. But because I was able to kind of go back and forth a couple of times, I really feel a deep sense of peace around the death process and dying.
It's really beautiful because it's going through these processes just lets you hold more. You've got more space to hold, not just for yourself, but for others too. I mean, so much, I think, when we don't have that capacity to hold more because maybe our experiences with these things have been limited, then we can't show up and hold that space for other people. And then, then we're not able to sort of play that role of supporting that in the full capacity of what it could be. So, I find the more that we personally have these types of experiences, I just find you just can show up and hold a larger amount, and you can be okay with more situations regardless of how much they pull on you or how uncomfortable they can be. It's you perceive them differently, and then you can hold that space longer. Yessica, I also really like that you did mention some stuff around with plant ceremonies, the importance of kind of following, I think, a particular lineage and sort of a history to it, because I know one of my concerns with that is that because it's become such a more popular thing, it can come up in so many different ways. And I think one of the most important parts you mentioned around that was that the entire process is a part of the medicine. The entire process. Even I think, to me, it's like wherever these medicines come from, like you did yours in the jungle, that's where the medicine's designed to be. I think that a person's experience, if you did it out in a bunch of redwoods, would be a different experience than doing it out in the jungle.
I think Jason Estes talked about that.
Jason
too.
Estes talked about that. That's right. He was talking about, if you did ayahuasca in the jungle where it was kind of meant to be, versus if you went to like California, I think, in the redwoods and did it, you'd have a very different experience with it. And so I think maybe for people that are interested in it, are there a few things that they should maybe consider before just jumping into plant medicine?
Oh yeah, 100%. So like I said, it's been a long journey for me. I'd already been preparing myself. Like you wouldn't step into a boxing ring with no preparation whatsoever, right? You would be like, "Oh yeah, I know how to punch." No, like you're going to get hit hard and you might even be seriously injured, right? So take it as seriously as preparing for a marathon, preparing for some big thing that requires like discipline, methodology, etc. Because there is so much, right? And I think I agree with you. We're making great strides with accessibility, but it's not there yet. Certainly not in the States. It's not there yet. And my concern is this: like, people often don't understand that ayahuasca is a brew. And you're right. It was like literally planted over there, cooked over there and we had it the next night. That's how incredible in this medicine the Taita doesn't allow anybody but his family members to touch it. It's like this whole thing about it, which then made me think, right? Like, so if you get it somewhere else where it's not from, how old is it? Number one, because think about juicing. That is really what it is. So if you go get a fresh juice that's just been squeezed and all this, and then have it like 3, 4, 6 months later, like think about that just for a second, right? People would be like, oh God, where's the expiration date? Or how long has this been sitting? Or, who's been coming in contact with it? Because we're also dealing with energetic stuff that, has, a big part in it, like you said, location and all that. So I would think, know where your medicine is coming from. Who has come in contact? How old is it? And then who's performing the ceremony? Is it some person that has had minimal training or none at all? Because anybody can feel like, well, I've had a few ceremonies. I think I can just do it. I could get a hold of some and I can just give it. One of the things that I've been fascinated by is watching. So I'm being thankfully and so humbly like accepted into this Inga tribe. And I've just been with extreme respect and humility asking to just learn, right? And the Taita said to me, I'm not going to teach you anything, the medicine will. But I'm kind of, ever since I was a little girl, I'm like, if I'm quiet and I'm in a corner, like the adults will let me, sit with them in the adult conversation. So I feel like I'm taking that approach with Taita. I'm saying, hey, if I can just be around you as you do the work and observe, I'm just learning. And he's allowing me to do this. So I've just watched him work. They call him the jaguar. And that's because oftentimes you will feel either the spirit of the jaguar, or you will literally see a jaguar, or you'll feel his presence right next to you and he's all the way over there. So kind of these things that happen. And of course, you're dealing in an energetic world. You're no longer on this dimensional plane, like all the rules that we know about 3D are out the window. So you're dealing with people who have negative entities. We all do. So it's not like this weird, like that guy was possessed over there. It's like, drugs, alcohol really bring that. So if you have somebody who struggles with that, they're going to struggle. So all this to say that I would not trust anybody else with my life and with like dealing with these negative entities as he does, right? He has 7 generations. I'm not saying he's the only one, but I'm saying there's people like him who have that level of expertise around that medicine for hundreds of years in their family. They know how to deal with the energetic side of it, the preparation, the ceremony behind it, which is so important. Because then if you have it somewhere else with people who have only been working for it with a couple of years, so many things can go wrong. So many things that look scary in the moment turn out totally okay, but only by a very knowledgeable individual who knows how to handle all of these energies.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you, Yessica, are there certain individuals that plant medicine wouldn't be advised?
Absolutely. The 2 main things I can think of is psychiatric issues that are severe. So if you're already in a place of like schizophrenia of any kind, right? Any kind of auditory, visual hallucinations, you're already there. This would not be the right method for you, right? This would not, because we're just augmenting perhaps some of these things that are going to perhaps more than likely put you in a worse shape than you are today. If you're already delusional in your thinking, if you're already these kinds of things, this would not be the right path for you. Also, just even severe psychiatric, symptoms like extreme borderline mania, all of these kinds of things. So for extreme types of psychiatric issues, it would just really need to be vetted very significantly, work very closely with a psychedelic friendly psychiatrist who knows what you're trying to do, or these alternative forms of healing. So that would definitely be one. The other would be extreme medical issues. And I'm not talking necessarily terminal, because there's been so many people with terminal cancer or some of these other illnesses that have seen incredible results through plant-based medicines, but it's more along the lines of cardiac issues or high blood pressure, these kinds of things, which the medicines might exacerbate.
Mm-hmm.
Are you concerned that ayahuasca and some of these other plant-based medicines are becoming, as they oftentimes turn out to become in Western societies, more of a form of consumerism as opposed to being based in tradition? And my other question would be then, when does it become more of an addiction as opposed to something that is sacred and possibly offering guidance?
Yeah, yes. So very valid couple of points. One is, yeah, they're seeking to make a synthetic version, a pill version. We always want, and that's ego mind, really. We want the quick fix. We don't want to go into what I always term the mirror. We don't want to look at the mirror, because the mirror shows us what is. We want to run away from it. We want to have a selfie that's nice and doctored. So in reality, the way it's going, it is going to be what it is, because that's how we approach healing. Well, not even healing, but really like mental health or well-being is, here's your pill. And people will really do want the easy answer. But if you want that deeper healing, like we're talking about with the experiential piece, and yes, there might be that grueling kind of dark night of the soul, but the upswing, usually to those deep experiences are incredible and life-changing. That's why you have those, right? And it's not to say that other types of clinical-based psychedelics won't be helpful. Yes, right now we don't really have many options, and the options we have are not very effective. So anything is going to, I think, be better than what we have today. But just to always keep remembering, and that's why these podcasts are so important, that where did these medicines come from? And if you ever do get a chance to make that investment, to go to where these medicines come from, have an experience so that you can at least say, yes, I understand, but I still take my pill when I come home or what have you. You have both of those. And then your other point, was around, when can this become an addiction? One of the things we actually joke about is that if you've ever tasted ayahuasca, it's one of the most disgusting things that you've ever had in your life, even for people who are like the tried and true, we call ourselves, medicine family and things like that. If you were to see people's faces, even full-fledged adults, right after you take it, and it's kind of like you feel horrible, because here you are in front of this altar from the shaman who it's his medicine, all this, and then they give you the cup, and you're like a child, like, okay. And then you literally take it, and then everybody kind of very quickly turns super quickly so that he doesn't see your grimacing faces of almost it coming right up. Because you don't want to be disrespectful, but it truly is the most disgusting thing. I often say, it's like wet mud with some pomegranate powder and maybe throw in some honey for that thick consistency, and put that together and chug it. So it's really gross. Not to make light of the subject, of course, we can trudge through anything, but it's really not pleasant. It's really not pleasant. And it really does have the purge effect, which, again, not very pleasant. It feels great afterwards, but not very pleasant. And I would say, I have heard, for instance, people who seek it for, I would say, the wrong reasons, right? Everything's intention, as we talked about. Like if you're trying to become a millionaire, right? If you're trying to get the next, aha experience, like, the next Tesla, download, I would just question more around that. Where is it really for your own spiritual soul growth, or is it really you're trying to just monetize? And I've heard a lot of that in the affluent circles, right? Like, what's the next big idea I can monetize?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a way for that to try and find a new avenue to be expressed. It's funny. Yessica, any final words that you would have for the audience before we finish up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you feel the call of the medicine, that's what they call it, right? The call of the medicine is just that inkling in your heart, in your mind that says, "Gosh, I'd love to have an experiential, experience like that." Um, then start your process of training yourself. Make sure that you do all the little things before, like the meditation, like starting to eat better, starting to take care of your body. All of these things kind of align, and I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody who is interested, has questions. What about bufo, cambo, these other medicines that are also jungle medicines that are incredible as well. I'd love to just have these conversations, because I'm very passionate about how these experiences can really change your life and your family and your community and the world, right? Because you can't come back from something like this and then like Taya says, just pick right back up with your problems in the same old way, because you've changed. Your perspective has changed, your mind has changed, and you've connected so much deeper with your higher self. So I'd love to discuss any of that, and I've put some of these downloads, I guess, in that book for an easy to do kind of manifestation process if you're new to it, or if you are old to it, but it's kind of like, how do you integrate plant medicines to something like that? And so I'd be happy to talk to anybody that wants to do that.
Wonderful. Where can people learn more about the work that you're doing? Where can they go to find that book? Where can they learn more about you? Where can we send people?
Sure. MindfulUExperiences.com is the company that partners with all these incredible healers and plant medicine people who have been vetted. So everybody that we go to has lineage with the medicine that they serve. So they're not anyone new to the medicine. These are all beautiful places, or in Colombia, a very rustic place, but an incredibly magical place. I really try to take away the worry about travel international. Like, we'll leave that to me and all the logistics. So all you focus on is your healing and your magical experience. And so anyway, for anything, mindfuluexperiences.com. The book is on Amazon or anywhere you purchase your books. And yeah, would love to hear from anybody that's interested.
Wonderful. All of that will be in the show notes, so people can go check that out. I definitely think that is a great service to be able to, if you're going to be interested in doing plant medicines, then definitely do it with somebody that knows what they're doing and has found the right authentic groups to be able to do it with. So wonderful. Yessica, that was great. Thank you so much for your time, and what a fun conversation.
Yeah, so much fun, you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Yessica.